The gas gauge reads a quarter tank, the clock on the dash says 2:17 in the morning, and the same green mile marker just passed your window for the third time. You tell yourself it is a different sign. You tell yourself the desert just looks like this everywhere, flat and dark and endless. But your hands are sweating on the wheel, and somewhere deep in your chest, a voice you cannot ignore is saying you have been on this road before, tonight, an hour ago, and you never actually left. That feeling, the one crawling up your spine right now just hearing about it, is something thousands of drivers across the world swear they have lived through. Not in a dream, not after too much coffee and too little sleep, wide awake, sober, terrified, driving a stretch of highway that seems to fold back on itself, refusing to let them reach the town they can already see lit up on the horizon. Truckers call it the loop. Locals near certain roads call it the long mile. And once you hear what actually happens to people who report it, you start to wonder if some roads remember the people who drive them. Here is why this matters more than a spooky campfire story. This is not folklore pulled from a dusty book nobody can verify. Police reports exist. 911 call logs exist. Highway patrol officers in places like Nevada, Pennsylvania, and rural Japan have documented callers describing the exact same sensation, on roads hundreds of miles apart with no contact between them. A trucker in Ohio and a nurse driving home in Oregon, total strangers, describing the same dashboard clock that will not move, the same fog that swallows the headlights, the same exit sign that keeps reading 12 miles no matter how far they drive. When that many unconnected people describe the same impossible night, you stop calling it coincidence and start calling it a pattern worth understanding. If this is already giving you chills, stick around, because the explanation gets stranger before it gets clearer. And if stories like this one keep you up wondering what is really out there on those empty roads, hit subscribe right now, because Shadowlight Stories has dozens more nights like this one waiting for you. And this is just the beginning of tonight's drive. So let's set the scene properly. Long-haul trucking exploded across America in the 1950s, when the interstate system was being built mile by endless mile through deserts, mountains, and farmland that had barely seen a paved road before. Drivers were suddenly spending 12, 14, sometimes 18 hours behind the wheel, often through the night to beat the heat and the traffic. And it was these drivers, the first generation to truly live on the road, who started whispering about something they did not have a name for yet. They would describe driving for what felt like 10 minutes, only to look at their odometer and realize 3 hours had vanished. Worse, some described the opposite. Driving for what felt like all night, exhausted, terrified, watching the same farmhouse pass by again and again, only to discover when they finally stopped that barely 20 minutes had actually gone by. Scientists eventually gave this a name, and it is real, it is documented, and it has a clinical explanation. They call it highway hypnosis. When a driver travels the same monotonous stretch of road for long enough, especially at night, especially when the brain is starved of new visual information, something strange happens in the mind. The conscious, decision-making part of your brain essentially checks out, while a deeper, automatic part takes the wheel. Literally. You keep steering, keep braking, keep reacting to taillights ahead of you, but the part of you that experiences time, that lays down new memories, simply goes quiet. Researchers studying long-haul drivers found that this state can last for miles, sometimes tens of miles, with the driver having almost no memory of the experience afterward. Imagine that. Imagine being awake, functional, capable of avoiding a deer in the road, and yet completely absent from your own mind for 20, 30, 40 miles of highway. But here is where the story stops being just psychology and starts becoming something else entirely. Highway hypnosis explains lost time. It does not explain repeated time. It does not explain the dozens of drivers who insist they passed the exact same diner, the exact same broken fence post, the exact same flickering streetlight, not once, not twice, but 3 or 4 times in a single night on a road with no loop, no roundabout, nothing but a straight line for 60 miles. That is not your brain skipping ahead. That is your brain swearing it watched the world repeat itself. Take the story that circulated for years among truckers on the long, lonely stretch of Highway 50 through Nevada, a road so empty and so remote it earned the nickname the loneliest road in America. Multiple drivers, separated by years and never having met each other, reported the same unnerving sequence. A long downhill stretch, a single dim light far ahead that never seemed to get closer, and then, without warning, the realization that the light behind them, the one they had supposedly already passed, was now somehow ahead of them again. One driver pulled over, got out, and stood on the shoulder in the freezing dark just to prove to himself the road was still a straight line. He said later that standing there, with nothing but wind and silence and that single light flickering in the distance, was the most afraid he had ever been in his life. More afraid than any accident, any near miss, any close call in 30 years of driving. Then there is the story from a much smaller, much darker road, the kind locals warn newcomers about without ever fully explaining why. A young couple driving home from a late shift took what they thought was a shortcut through wooded backroads they had driven 100 times before. Within minutes, the trees on either side seemed to thicken, the radio dissolved into static, and the road, a road they could practically drive blindfolded, stretched on far longer than it should have. They described passing the same leaning mailbox, the same dead oak tree split by lightning, the same rusted farm gate, over and over, for nearly 40 minutes, on a stretch of road that normally took 6. When they finally broke free of it, gasping, shaking, neither of them could explain what had happened, only that the road had not wanted to let them go. What makes stories like this so unsettling is not just the fear in the moment, it is what they reveal about us as people. We like to believe we are always in control behind the wheel, masters of distance, masters of time, 4 wheels and a destination, and nothing standing between us and where we are going. These stories strip that illusion away in seconds. They remind us that control is often an agreement we make with the world, not a guarantee, and that the moment something quietly breaks that agreement, even something as simple as a road refusing to end, our minds reach instantly for fear, because fear is what fills the space where certainty used to be. And here is the detail almost nobody talks about, the one that changes how you see this whole phenomenon. Researchers studying these reports noticed something strange buried in the pattern. The vast majority of these endless road experiences happen not on the most dangerous, twisting, treacherous highways, but on the most boring ones. Long, flat, perfectly straight stretches with almost no curves, no hills, nothing to break the monotony. The very safety of these roads, the lack of anything demanding your attention, is what seems to invite the mind to slip away from itself. In other words, it is not the dangerous roads that swallow drivers whole. It is the easy ones. The ones that ask nothing of you are exactly the ones where your own mind quietly takes over and starts writing a story you never agreed to be part of. So what do you take from all of this the next time you are driving alone, late, with nothing but headlights and white lines for company? Maybe it is this. The most ordinary moments of your life, a quiet drive, an empty road, a familiar route you could do half asleep, are also the moments your mind is most free to wander somewhere you cannot fully follow. Most of the time that is harmless. A daydream, a lost 10 minutes, nothing more. But every so often, according to hundreds of strangers who never met each other and never compared notes, something on those long, empty stretches notices when your mind lets go of the wheel, even for a second, and it answers back. If a road has ever felt like it was watching you, or if you have your own story about a drive that lasted far longer or far shorter than it should have, tell it in the comments below, because some of the best stories on this channel started exactly that way, with one person brave enough to admit what they saw on a road at night. And if this story kept you watching until the very last second, send it to the one friend who always drives home late, not because they need a scare, but because next time they are alone on a quiet highway, they will think of this. Check their mirrors and maybe, just maybe, stay a little more awake than they planned to. Because the truth is, the road does not need monsters, ghosts, or anything hiding in the dark to terrify you. All it needs is enough silence, enough straight line, and enough time until you stop being sure whether you are driving forward or simply driving in place, waiting for a road that was never going to let you arrive.